the National Center for State Courts, and the National Association for Pretrial Services Agencies, we'd like to thank you very much for coming to our presentation about the National Pretrial Reporting Program, or NPRP. The NPRP is a revitalization of a data collection designed to collect information about pretrial release, detention, and misconduct in state courts, from pretrial services agencies, state courts, and jails. As Cameron mentioned, at any time during the presentation, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature and use the chat feature to discuss and say hello to your colleagues. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Erica Grasmick from the Bureau of Justice Statistics for some more information about today's presentation.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. It's great to see so much interest in this project. Before we get started, just a heads up that this presentation is being recorded and will be available through links on the NCSC and NAPSA websites after the webinar within about a week. Sorry. Thank you all for devoting your Thursday afternoon to this webinar. I'm a statistician with BJS and the project manager for the National Pretrial Reporting Program. We'll start the presentation with a brief overview of the project. The partners will then introduce themselves and their pivotal roles on the project. We'll move on to some discussion about the evolution of this effort. We'll touch on what to expect and the goals of the data capacity interviews. We'll then review the data collection process and what we hope to report on. Finally, we'll cover the benefits of participating in NPRP and wrap up with questions and input from all of you. NPRP is a new data collection effort we're launching in partnership with RTI, NAPSA, NCSC, Pragmatica, and Applied Research Services. Broadly speaking, we're hoping to gather administrative data from courts, jails, and pretrial services agencies to generate reliable national estimates on key aspects of the pretrial process. We'll be gathering felony case level data from the largest counties nationwide. BJS will work with Pragmatica to obtain criminal history using identifiers provided in the court, jail, and pretrial services data, and subsequently link the criminal histories to the administrative data. To date, there are substantial voids of information on the pretrial phase of the criminal justice system. We expect this effort to fill those gaps by collecting and standardizing data across large jurisdictions. The data reported will hopefully help individual agencies identify opportunities to modify their own practices based on the national pretrial landscape. Also, pretrial service practices have dramatic variations across jurisdictions, and this effort will attempt to distill those variations down into more informative estimates. These standardized estimates can illuminate the efficacy of current detention and release procedures. So why does BJS want data on pretrial? Well, public interest and policy reform interests have fueled the need for comprehensive, informative pretrial data. BJS is responding to a formal congressional request for pretrial data, including lengths of pretrial detention, numbers and demographics of individuals detained pretrial, financial conditions associated with release, and the frequency with which those conditions are unable to be met. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to our partners in NPRP, starting with Suzanne Strong from RTI.
Thank you, Erica. RTI is excited to join this important data collection. We are a nonprofit research institute, and we focus on the most critical problems facing the world with science-based solutions. Our team has over 20 years of experience with courts, pretrial services agencies, and jail data collections. Matthew D. Michelle leads our team as principal investigator, with Tim Smith as our senior technical advisor, and myself, Suzanne Strong, as project director. Matthew's research, among other things, includes pretrial release and pretrial risk assessments. Tim Smith directs RTI's program for establishment-based research. He has over 20 years of experience directing survey research involving adult and juvenile correctional facilities and law enforcement, among other areas of research. My research portfolio includes courts, jails, and pretrial release, among other things. For this project, RTI will host a secure data transfer. We will hold all of your data and link the data between the agencies, and then de-identify any personally identifiable information submitted with the data and create anonymized identifiers. RTI will also lead the data processing for all jail and pretrial services data. The National Center for State Courts will process the court data, and then RTI will link the court data to jail and pretrial services agency data. To speak more about the role of the National Center for State Courts is Cynthia Lee.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cynthia Lee. I'm a Senior Court Research Associate at the National Center for State Courts, and I'll be directing NCSC's efforts on the National Pretrial Reporting Program. NCSC's role on this project will be to conduct the data capacity survey for the courts and to collect, clean, and process all of the court data. Our motivation for becoming involved in this project, beyond the importance of this subject matter, was to reduce the burden of data collection on the courts, as well as to ensure that the court data are coded and interpreted as correctly and consistently as possible. So to reduce the burden of data collection on the courts, we aligned the court data request for this project as closely as possible with the National Open Court Data Standards, or NODS, which many courts will be familiar with. They were released a year or two ago by the Conference of State Court Administrators. Many of our project staff have several years of experience with court data working on NCSC's Court Statistics Project, and several of them were also involved in the development of the NODS standards. In addition, the NCSC team has already been working with BJS on another criminal data collection that's currently underway called Criminal Cases in State Courts. So the project team for both of these projects is identical. And to the greatest degree possible, we're going to align staffing across the two projects so that if your court or state has participated in CCSC and is also participating in the National Pretrial Reporting Program, as much as possible, we'll assign you the same NCSC staff member to be your liaison so that we can take advantage of all of that knowledge that those staff members have developed about the intricacies of data in that particular state or court. And NCSC plans to work very, very closely with courts and states to during the data cleaning process to ensure that we're correctly interpreting all of the values and codes in your court data. So now I'd like to turn it over to Jim Sawyer from the National Association of Pretrial Services Agencies, who will talk about his organization's role in the project.
Thanks, Cynthia. As Cynthia mentioned, I'm Jim Sawyer. I'm the Executive Director for NAPSA, and we're very excited to be a part of this project. NAPSA has been around since 1973. We primarily focus our efforts around training and education, our national standards on pretrial release and pretrial diversion. We host an annual conference, and we also spend a lot of our time supporting research in the field. So this project right there just fits exactly with what we believe our mission to be. To be sure, this is an ambitious project. We learned that many years ago in the first round of the old SCIPS data. But we're excited to be, as I mentioned, we're excited to be a big part of this. And our role is to lead and facilitate a pretrial advisory committee. We've put together an advisory committee of 3 pretrial executives, 3 of the largest 200. So they're not only helping to advise this project, but also being a participant in the data collection. Our additional roles include informing the timeline and tasks with NPRP. We've been working closely with RTI on that to date. Again, we also will assist in data capacity and interview development and outreach to pretrial agencies, just to help them understand what the program is, how they can get involved, and to help them smooth out any bumps along the way. We're also going to advise the project on pretrial agency sampling plans, and we're going to assist in data collection, outreach, and dissemination. We believe that this project has tremendous value to the pretrial field, and that's one of the reasons that we wholeheartedly support what's going on. We often say that that research in pretrial is lacking. So we're hoping that this project will add value to what the field is going through and to help share and disseminate information that even if you're not in the largest 200, you'll find value in the information. So with that, goes back to Erica.
Thanks, Jim. And you mentioned SCIPS, which I'm about to talk about now. So NPRP is a direct descendant of the SCIPS program, also known as the State Court Processing Statistics Program. The last time data was collected for SCIPS was in 2009. Similar to this new data collection effort for NPRP, SCIPS was also collected felony filings, but in a more limited fashion. SCIPS included felony filings for a combination of 9 counties sampled with certainty due to their number of felony filings, and an additional sample of 30 from the remaining 75 largest counties for a total of 39 counties. The process ended up being very labor intensive and thus covered only a short window of time in May of 2009, spanning anywhere from 5 to 20 business days worth of felony filings in courts, depending on the number of filings for that county. The new NPRP enhances some of the aspects of SCIPS, taking advantage of the 12 years that have passed, and will rely heavily on the more widespread use of digital data, and hopefully won't require manual transcription. The sampling frame of NPRP will jump to 200 of the largest jurisdictions nationwide. Additionally, the time frame will include all felonies filed in a full year instead of a maximum of 20 business days. We are planning to collect 2019 data in an effort to avoid the anomalous nature of criminal justice practices in 2020, although we realize we may still encounter some of COVID's impact for cases awaiting adjudication. In addition, courts, jails, and pretrial services agencies for all selected jurisdictions will be included in the data collection. Including pretrial services agencies and jails will further enhance our understanding of the pretrial process. This will allow us to include a much wider range of data elements. Suzanne is now going to walk you through the data capacity interviews.
The first part of the project is to really understand the data capacity in all of your agencies. RTI and NCSC will conduct the data capacity interviews with jail, pretrial services agencies, and court personnel in the largest 200 counties. These interviews are tentatively scheduled to begin this month and to conclude around December 2021. You should be getting an email in the next 2 weeks or so to begin scheduling the interviews or to identify the relevant personnel in your offices that may be able to assist us with this interview process. Each interview is expected to take about 1 hour. These interviews have several purposes. The first is to understand the policies and practices that impact how data is reported. We are requesting that we talk to people in your offices who are knowledgeable about the data systems and the case management systems that you use, as well as the policies, practices, and laws that may impact the kinds of data that you record. For example, counties with a bail schedule may have more rigid bail settings than counties without a bail schedule. So it's important to understand in advance which counties have bail schedules and which do not. The data capacity interviews, again, help us in several ways. We are going to use the data capacity interviews to help inform the data elements that we will request from jails, from courts, and from pretrial services agencies. The interviews will also help us understand why the data may be different from county to county and from state to state. A county with mandatory pretrial diversion for drug possession cases will look very different in terms of caseload from counties without mandatory diversion. Last, these interviews should help us to understand and interpret your data. And probably most important, these interviews will help us to identify potential problems with linking, including identifying linking variables or other methods to link data between the agencies. During the data capacity interviews, we are going to ask if you are willing to provide us with sample data extracts. We are hoping that 10 to 15 of you volunteer. If an agency in one county volunteers, we will reach out to the other agencies in that county. And there are several reasons that we are going to try to collect pilot data for this collection. First, it helps us to estimate the amount of time that may be necessary to work through any data use agreements or data transfer practices that your county or agency may have. We can also test that the data extract guide that we develop is helpful to you in understanding what kinds of data we are requesting from your agency. We really are trying to make this process as easy as possible for you. And last, and probably most exciting for all of us, is that we get to see your data. Seeing your data early helps us to understand some of the differences in the fields, text fields, standard fields, standardization, and other challenges that we may encounter when trying to interpret your data. We do want to make sure that we do understand your data, and the earlier that we see it, the better we can do so.
For the full NPRP data collection, we hope to start in January of 2022. As mentioned earlier, we are specifically seeking 2019 data in an attempt to circumvent the COVID effects to the greatest extent. We anticipate that the pilot and data capacity interviews will inform our full collection process and uncover ways for us to lessen the burden on data providers. Suzanne was just touching on all of the ways that those data capacity interviews can really hopefully help smooth out the process. The largest 75 counties will be sampled with certainty, and an additional 50 will be sampled from the remaining 125 counties. Some of the areas we hope to report on include defendant demographics, charges, pretrial detention duration, release conditions and violations, case outcomes, and sentencing. Additionally, BJS will work with Pragmatica to obtain criminal history using identifiers provided in the data extracts and subsequently link the criminal histories to the administrative data. Some of the benefits to participating in NPRP include answering the mail for the public on the widespread growing interest in pretrial practices. Furthermore, the data will dramatically enhance understanding of the processing of pretrial defendants in similarly sized agencies. Also, as noted earlier, this collection effort is a direct response to the congressional request for detailed data on the pretrial process, and we need your help to fulfill this request. The data gathered will likely enable agencies to identify strengths and weaknesses in both their data and pretrial processes.
As Erica mentioned, we're hoping that we can help you understand your data a little bit better. We can tell you which fields have the most missing information, or help you to answer some questions that you may have about your own data. A last benefit that's becoming more and more common in today's technical age is that everybody wants data. They want evidence and data to support claims for increased funding, for training and technical assistance programs, to answer case management needs. A better understanding of your data should benefit you.
We'd really like to streamline this as much as possible for agencies and make the data extraction as easy as possible. If you have thoughts now or at any point during the project that you think would help make the data extraction process more streamlined, please let us know. Specifically, we're really interested in knowing how long you think it would take to pull a year's worth of data from your agency, and also what challenges you anticipate you've encountered in past administrative data collection efforts. And please feel free to enter your answers to those questions if you have them in the Q&A or the chat. And is it okay if I read one of the questions out loud? Are we okay with that? Okay. The question was regarding data and how do we ensure that the data is identified and that we're also linking criminal history to the correct person. And what day do you obtain criminal history is the same day for each person? This is an excellent question. Thank you for asking. So to answer the second part of this question, the person is asking about which day we're going to pull criminal history and if we'll pull the criminal history on the same day. My understanding, and I might be wrong on this, and please feel free to reach out to me if you want to follow up. My contact information is coming on the next slide, or 2 slides from now, is that we'll be doing batch queries, so it would be the same day. And I just want to make sure I answer the first question. That's an excellent, so the first question was talking about de-identified data and making sure that we're linking criminal history to the correct person. So the criminal history is going to have to be linked using, hopefully, the identifiers provided by the agencies within the data. Hopefully we're not reduced to having to use names in conjunction with the dates of birth. It'll be a lot easier if we have identifiers, and then we'll feel it'll be a lot easier for us to link it to the criminal history.
I can read them for you, Erica, if you'd like.
Oh, yes, sure, thanks.
What kind of software are some of these pretrial release programs using to log this data? Our program is fairly small and we have mostly paper records.
I can speak to the previous question a little bit about how data will be de-identified. So assuming that we are able to obtain identifiers such as data identification number, FBI number, those would be the numbers that are used in BJS's transmission to Pragmatica to get the criminal history records. Then those will come back and we will be able to link by those same state identification numbers and FBI numbers. The process of de-identification would be to create a crosswalk between the provided identifier and an anonymized identifier. We don't know yet how we're going to anonymize, if we're going to include a series of numbers and letters, or if it will just be numbers, but it will be nothing that could be linked to the FBI or SID number and will be stored completely separately from any of the data once it's been de-identified. We've done this in other projects with some success. Well, I wouldn't say some success, with a high level of success and guarantee that these data were not able to be linked back to the individual person. Additionally, if there are certain characteristics about the crime that make it very unique, for example, a mass murder or something of that, we may have to discuss additional ways to de-identify the data so that it would be difficult to attach back to a single individual. And if those cases are found in your jurisdiction, we'll work with you to ensure that we are making sure that the data can't be tied back or traced back to a single individual. And Erica, I'll let you know about, or I'm guessing the pretrial services programs. Jim, would you be able to speak to some of this?
I think they're asking what kind of software are some of the pretrial programs using. It varies. And I get that your program is small and you mostly paper records. Obviously, those paper records are going to probably make transmission a little bit more difficult if you are considered one of the top 200. But you can talk to me offline and I can put you in touch with some other pretrial executives and they'll let you know what types of software they're using for their database management and their data records.
I was just going to move on to the next question, which is asking whether the data will be available to the general public. And yes, it will be available to the general public once it is de-identified. The next question pertains to whether there is any financial support. There is a small possibility of us being able to help financially if there is a huge burden on your agency, but it's going to have to be on a case-by-case basis. So please reach out to us and we can work with you one-on-one. The next question is pertaining to criminal history, number of felony convictions, type of felony convictions, prior sentence. That's a good question. I think we're going to have to see how it plays out as far as us being able to link it to the criminal history, and definitely looking at number of felony convictions would be high on the list. And also the prior sentence as far as pretrial release goes. Sorry, I'm reading the next one. The top 200 have actually already been determined, and it's based on the population served by the jurisdiction. And that's a great, Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong, is it number of felony filings or is it just based on population within the county?
We had gone back and forth on this because SCIPs used different levels of historical felony filings to determine case processing size. But since BJS hasn't fielded SCIPs since 2009, we really had no way of knowing other than some of the information from NCSC and Court Statistics Project, and whether or not we could even come up with cases processed. And additionally, looking at the number of court cases might not be indicative of, the jail population or the pretrial services population. So finally, after a lot of discussion, we landed on just using the county population size to determine the largest 200 counties. Yes.
Thanks. That was the end of the list of questions. Did I miss anything?
Erica, I'm wondering if you or Kevin would be able to explain a little bit more about how access to the data will be regulated through the National Archive of Criminal Justice data.
Right. Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Wait, actually, Kevin, did you want to answer this question?
Hi, I'm Kevin Scott. I'm also with the Bureau of Justice Statistics. When we say that the data will be publicly available, and this is fairly consistent across BJS's data collections, where it is theoretically possible to re-identify an individual, we put the data behind a series of protective requirements. And one of those requirements is that there's institutional review board approval of research requests. So the data are available to researchers to answer research questions, but those researchers must acknowledge and agree to abide by requirements that they protect the information and the confidentiality of the information that would be contained in the data set. We have already de-identified the data, but there is always theoretically the possibility that by matching with another data set or by kind of going row by row to look at really anomalous cases, one could re-identify the data. And part of the IRB requirement is to prevent the data that we collect and then try to make publicly available to the extent possible, is to prevent those data being used to identify particular individuals. And BJS's federal statutes require that we collect data in a way that the data cannot be used for enforcement purposes. So that is an additional reason for BJS to be as careful as possible that the data to try to balance public availability of the data with the requirement that the data not be used to identify or re-identify individuals.
Thanks, Kevin.
Erica, a couple of new questions came in, so I figured I'll just read it out to you. Is it a continuation of the SCIPs in the sense that all the variables will be the same?
They're going to be very similar, except there's going to be a lot more, there will be a lot more variables that we're gathering information on, since we're getting variables from 3 different agencies.
Another question was, for new arrests after a bond hearing, will you be looking strictly at what happens during the pretrial period or for another standard follow-up? And maybe I can ask a clarifying question too. So is this talking about a person who was originally arrested, then released on bond, and then re-arrested and re-released if we're looking only at that first arrest, or am I misunderstanding that question? I'll give some time for the person to answer that and say, the next question is, can our IT departments be included on any calls so their technical questions can be answered? They will often be the ones driving the data extraction.
Absolutely, they can be included on the calls. We hope that they are available to be on the calls, in fact, so that we don't have to bug your agency more than once with more questions.
Okay, and then our next question is, I apologize if I missed this, but after the first 200 jurisdictions, will there be other opportunities to participate? If so, how will those jurisdictions be chosen?
So at this time, this is our first time initiating on this National Pretrial Reporting Program, even though it has a descendant of skips to it, but it is our first time doing this. So we don't have plans yet to move beyond this because we just want to get through this first, but hopefully so.
And we do have a follow-up to our earlier question. So I'll reread the first question in our follow-up. For new arrests after a bond hearing, will you be looking strictly at what happens during the pretrial period or for another standard follow-up? And then to clarify, I'm talking about whether you're looking at pretrial outcomes, not just criminal histories.
Yes, we are looking at pretrial outcomes, definitely not just criminal histories. That's just a factor, just a piece of our data.
I don't see any other questions coming in on this particular topic, so I will move to our next session of question and answers. Before we do that though, I wanted to ask, is there any way that you could, I mean, I know this is impossible to answer without seeing a data extraction request, but understanding that we are looking for the time from court filings and first initial appearance through the closure of the case, which would technically to us be the final finding or outcome by the court, to look at a year's worth of data of felony cases. How would there be an estimate to the amount of time it would take you to pull a data extract of that size? Or is it something that we should talk to you about during the data capacity surveys? And in the meantime, as I posed that question, another question came in, Erica. It says, what about pandemic effects? California had an emergency bail schedule.
So that was a large driver of our selection of 2019 filings. We understand, though, that obviously the cases that were filed toward the end of 2019, it's possible we're going to run into the pandemic effects of 2020. But this was our best workaround, was to kind of go before the pandemic. So, and if we run into it, it's kind of hard to work. It's hard. It was very challenging for us to come up with a way to work completely around it. So that was kind of the best balance we could strike. You all have so much rich institutional knowledge, and we're really looking forward to learning from all of you as this project progresses. And I'm really excited to see so many attendees because it gives us more energy for our project and excitement. Are there any other questions at this time that we can answer? Yes, so there was just a question about when the data capacity survey, the data capacity interviews will start to be scheduled, and that invitation will go out in the next 2 weeks. So the 200 largest jurisdictions will start hearing from us. Oh, thank you. I just saw the comment about California. Thank you.
It doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in.
Okay. Maybe we can just move to our contact information for everybody. So please feel free to reach out to any of us with further questions. And I'm so grateful for you coming this afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.